Hello everyone, I'm Jim Johnson, and I want to welcome all of our guests on behalf of the Danforth Leadership Council. The Danforth Leadership Council is a group of 60 community leaders dedicated to being part of the solution for St. Louis, and of the belief that supporting the mission of the Danforth Center, particularly its goal to have St. Louis become the World Center for Plant Science, will strengthen St. Louis and our region. Today's event, The Seeds of Change, is to be held annually and feature an individual we feel can provoke and instill profound change in our community. The goal is to give engaged people living in the region an opportunity to connect with others who think passionately about our community. We are incredibly grateful that Hugh Grant has agreed to be our inaugural speaker and hope that this new event will provide a reminder that our region, while not without challenges, has world-class assets: science, art, music, educational, and medical institutions, philanthropic citizens, and more, which can be leveraged to make us all stronger. A bit of housekeeping before I introduce our speaker. For the question period, you should have picked up a question card and a pencil outside. Hugh's bio is on one side, but on the other side you'll find a space to jot your questions. To ensure we have a representation of questions for Hugh, questions should be written out legibly and submitted to an usher. They will be only accepted until 8:30, after which no written questions can be submitted. If time permits, the floor will be open to additional questions from the audience. To ensure that all questions can be heard, please refrain from asking questions if you have not been provided with a microphone, and we have microphones located at each side. Following the last question, Dr. Danforth will have some closing remarks to share. With that, I'd like to welcome and thank Hugh Grant, our inaugural Seeds of Change presenter. You can see his bio on the card I just mentioned, but I want to say that he was our unanimous first choice for this role because, yes, he is in the world of plant science. Future presenters may not necessarily be. But he and Monsanto have been innovators, and their example of new, critical thinking about long-standing problems is an example for others to follow. Like you, I'm anxious to hear what he has to say. Without further delay, please join me in welcoming a Danforth Center trustee, chairman of the board, president, and chief executive officer of Monsanto, Hugh Grant. Hugh.
Thank you, Jim. Thanks very much to the Danforth team, and thanks particularly to Bill for this kind invite. So I'm very honoured to be the first Seeds of Change speaker. I'm looking forward to the dialogue. There's always a dialogue around biotechnology and agriculture, so I'm looking forward to that. And I'm really pleased, particularly in a wet St. Louis morning, that it was such a short commute this morning. I've spoken a lot of different places. I've never had a shorter commute, so it's really great to be here. And I apologize for the change of dates. I know that that caused a number of people grief and heartburn, so I appreciate you hanging with me this morning. It's kind of nice being somewhere like this where you get a chance to talk and you don't have to start by explaining why you have a biotech company in St. Louis. Because quite often it starts with, why not San Diego? Why not the Bay Area? Why not Boston? And I don't need to explain that. You're already there on the St. Louis piece. And the answer is, and it kind of talks to some of this Seeds of Change thing, St. Louis has become a science hub. St. Louis has become a destination, and I know that many of you get that. So, if we just frame the conversation, who's Monsanto? What do we do? We're all about agriculture, and for those of you that have been in St. Louis a long time, you know that wasn't always the case, and it's been a long voyage with many twists and turns. But we're all about agriculture. And within agriculture, really, we do corn, soy, cotton, and in the last few years, veggies. And I'm very proud of our veggie business. Some people say veggies is a derogatory term. It's really a term of fondness. So We're lucky here in St. Louis because we are in the heart of farming. And I think sometimes when you live here for a while, you tend to forget that. But from here in St. Louis, and it's why I think for agriculture and for plant science, it is such a natural hub. Because from here, within a 500-mile radius, you have 3/4 of all America's corn crop, and you have about 80% of all America's soybeans. So we're crop central. And it makes it a really, really interesting place because you're closely connected to your customers and you're closely connected to people who care about these crops. So it's no coincidence that the National Corn Growers are headquartered here, that the American Soybean Association is headquartered here, and the United Soy Board is headquartered here. So it's that Forrest Gump school of, you go where the crops are. So we're close to where the crops are here. There's an enormous amount of really cool science going on right here in St. Louis. And that's why being centered here, I think, is a natural evolution, it's a natural outcome. And increasingly, and I think there should be more, but increasingly, we see startups emerging here as well. So the crops are here, the science is here, and I would hope, and maybe that's one of the seeds of change, that increasingly we'll see more and more fledgling businesses developing here as well around these remarkable opportunities. At the last count, there's more than 250, 260,000 people working in the greater metropolitan area with associations or linkages to agriculture. So sometimes it's a little bit out of sight, out of mind. It's a vibrant piece of the economy, and it's growing significantly. So, it's good to be home. It's nice to be here. It's good to be home, and there's an opportunity in the region with the linkages that are here today. I think sometimes what's missed in this is this region touches the world. So those soybeans that start life here, less than a few hundred miles away, are transported around the world. And the science and the innovation in its broadest sense that begins here in the region is trucked and transported in ships, and it ends up in people's food in distant shores, particularly and increasingly in China. I'm really pleased to be at the Donald Danforth Plant Science Center, not because it's a short commute, not because we're just across the street, but there's a lot of common values and commonly held beliefs in two very, very different institutions. But there is a great deal of commonality between the two. And one of the commonly held views between the two institutions is that better seed given to farmers who plant it anywhere in the world can play a key role in alleviating hunger and improving nutrition for many. And I think it's interesting that a profit and a non-profit organization have a very common view of that outcome, and that isn't always the case. In fact, very often it isn't the case. So right here, if you leave the auditorium, you pass the coffee shop outside and you go upstairs, people are doing real work. Hard to believe, but it's true. And they're doing really, really cool work in areas like cassava. Cassava is a plant that satisfies the nutritional needs for about 750 million people in parts of Asia and a large part of sub-Saharan Africa. And the team here is working diligently on disease resistance in that crop. They're also working in sorghum, or where I come from, millet. They're working in sorghum, and they're looking at increasing the nutritional value of sorghum. And they're also beginning work on disease resistance in rice. These are important platforms for nutrition, and they have the potential of changing people's lives far away from St. Louis. So there's a lot going on here. A lot of people ask me about challenges, the significant challenges, the magnitude of these challenges, and I think sometimes it's kind of Scottish optimism. That was a joke. You're going to have to work with me in some of this. I think it's Scottish optimism because I don't really view a lot of this as challenges. I think they're remarkable opportunities. They're challenges that need to be faced, but there's opportunities that are unlocked within those challenges. At Monsanto 2 years ago, and it's hard to believe that it's now 2 years ago, we launched a sustainable yield initiative. It was a commitment or a promise projected into the future. And the day that you make one of these declarations, it begins as an empty promise. You're only as good as the declaration. As time passes, you populate that with data. So we're 2 years into this voyage, but the commitment was that we believed that you could double yields in corn, soy, and cotton between 2000 and 2030. So the capacity is there in 3 of the major crops that are all grown in our backyard, that we could double those yields in the next 25 to 30 years. That's the opportunity. It's a business opportunity. I like it because it's got a single point of focus, but it's actually bigger than that because the challenge extends to saying, as you double, how do you do it with a third less stuff? And stuff's the technical term for fertilizer, water, and soil. Because in this tiny speck that we live on, the challenge in the long run is, how do you do more with less? It's always possible to do more. The challenge for our children and grandchildren in particular is, how do we do that with less stuff? When you talk to groups, and this really I think is the heart of Seeds of Change, when you talk to groups and you talk about some of these things, when you talk about doubling yield, the fascinating thing for me in the last 2 years has been, when we say yield, many of these groups hear habitat. So if you can double yield on the same acre, it means you don't need to chop down another tree, you don't need to plow down another acre of virgin grassland, and you maintain habitat which is increasingly fragile. And the learning for this, for me, has been there's always a middle ground in these conversations, and the middle ground in this one is the translation of improving yield and what that means for habitat preservation. So what's the motivation in this? The motivation is profit. So as a for-profit institution, there is a fabulous business opportunity there. We have some challenges today, but there's a fabulous business opportunity there. But I think there's also a responsibility that goes with being a successful business. And the motivation, the reality in this is that sometime in that 20 to 30 year time frame, probably beyond 30 years, population will grow from about 6.75 billion people today to about 9 billion people. So there's a whole bunch more people are going to turn up at the party. They're going to represent more hungry mouths to feed, but I think that's only half the story. In fact, statistically, it's only half the story. The other half, and it's probably the bigger half, is they're eating different. And they're eating different in that their protein expectations and their protein demands are greater. And as they talk about tasting their first steak on a Friday evening, they're eating grain that's originated within 500 miles of the Danforth Plant Science Centre here. So it takes 7 pounds of grain to make a pound of beef. It takes about a pound of grain protein to make a pound of fish. So as you go from fish to chicken to pork to beef, the grain demand increases. Water's in short supply. 70% of the fresh water in America today is consumed in agriculture. 30% is left for Coke, Pepsi, swimming pools, and anything else that you choose to do with it. But the lion's share of water is consumed in agriculture today, and that's clearly a curve that needs to be changed. So a third less stuff as we welcome another 1.5 billion people at the party becomes an imperative. It's a challenge, it's a business opportunity, but it's something that we need to figure out. And the final piece of this is the reality that it's getting warmer. It's getting warmer in most places. And 10 years ago, that would have been a discussion here. The reality is today it's getting much warmer. So food gets shorter, the challenge in producing food escalates, water becomes scarcer, and it gets warmer. And the crux of those things, the nexus of that, occurs first in Africa. And Africa goes backwards as everywhere else advances. And if you think about food and food challenges, water and water challenges, and the fact that it gets warmer faster in Africa than anywhere else, I think there's a responsibility and an opportunity in focusing some of these technologies and focusing the opportunity of these technologies in Africa. And maybe the heart of this morning, as the first in a series of speakers on Seeds of Change, isn't really about the technology, which is very cool. I'm biased, but it's very cool. It's not really about the technology, about the gee-whiz science. It's not really about the seeds. I think that the heart of this, from a Seeds of Change perspective, is really about the ability of working in partnerships. Because when you look at the magnitude of some of these challenges, they aren't cracked simply by great science. It's how groups come together to solve some of these larger problems. And for us at Monsanto, that took a long time to figure out. Self-evident, but took a long time to figure out. We can't do this on our own. And success, I think, increasingly is defined in an institution's ability to work across multiple stakeholder groups, NGOs, public institutions, private institutions, philanthropic groups, and governmental departments. And there's a long list of failures where those individual groups have tried to figure this out on their own. So the challenge is how you bring those together. Relationships are really hard to do. It's hard enough in marriage when you love somebody. So trying to do it with groups that are disparate or who spend so much time defining why they don't agree with you, I think is very difficult to do. I don't think anybody has this figured out, but I think it's the fulcrum or the leverage point that changes the success rate in some of these larger challenges that we face. Let me just give you one brief snapshot. Africa. There's two places in the world eat white corn. Mexico and tortillas, and Africa and white porridge. Everywhere else in the world eats yellow corn. To deliver a ton of corn to Malawi costs somewhere in the region of $400 to $500. A ton of corn feeds a family of 6 for a year. To grow that ton of corn in the same village in Africa costs $50 to $60. A handful of seed isn't biotech. A handful of seed and a handful of fertilizer. It's a 10x leverage. So for those of you in the business community, you can spend your whole life and never see a 10x leverage. You know, the deal where I give you 1 and you give me 10, you do that deal every day of the week. So figuring out how you plant a seed rather than trucking a ton of seed is really what this is all about. At Monsanto 2 years ago, we announced a water-efficient maize for Africa program. This is maize that grows, corn that grows in drought conditions. We'll commercialize these products in the US in 2013, and in a perfect world, they would be available in sub-Saharan Africa the same day that they were available in Iowa. We've donated the technologies royalty-free. There's 5 African countries are working on these projects with leading NGOs in those countries. We donated our germplasm, our breeding tools, and our know-how, and the project's been funded by the Gates Foundation and the Buffett Foundation to the tune of about $47 million. The early readout in Uganda, Tanzania, and Mozambique is promising, and Natalie DeNicola, I don't know if Natalie's here, she's not, but we'll recognize her anyway, has led this with passion. And the biggest challenge in this hasn't been the really cool science. The challenge is bringing disparate groups together with one common agenda and learning to work with groups that ordinarily you would never be with. So, the seed of change for me is how you work through others, how you deliver through others, and how you find common platforms with governments, NGOs, and for-profits. And I think that defines the next few decades in commercial enterprise and how we do what we do best and how we get out of the way in the areas that we don't do well. It's difficult, but I think there's opportunities. Average corn yields in America, this last year, 162 bushels an acre. If you draw the bell curve and you take the average, 162 bushels an acre in the US. In Brazil, India, and Mexico, the average yields are about 50 bushels. In Africa, 15 to 20. The soil's about the same. The sun shines a little bit better, certainly compared to today, and the rainfall's more predictable. There's no reason why those yields can't be higher. We've launched new beans this year. They'll yield 7 to 11% more than regular beans. The average rate of gain in beans in the last 20 or 30 years is about 0.5%. So if you think about it as yield in a financial term, there are bonds that are yielding about 0.5% more per year. We'll launch a bean this year that yields 7 to 11% more. It's like 5 or 6 years of yield advantage in 1 year. It would be like driving the 2016 Lexus tomorrow morning. The opportunity for increasing yield and making a difference on the same acre is with us today. It's how we work with groups to unlock that opportunity around the world. In the environmental arena, we're working today in partnerships in Brazil and 2 large projects in the Cerrados, which is savanna, succession forest, grassland areas, and in the Atlantic rainforest. We're looking at conservation areas and maintaining habitat for animals. Here at home in the Mississippi, we've been working on projects to reduce sediment runoff that finds its way all the way down into the Gulf of Mexico. And I was listening to an NPR article on that this morning. They're examples or illustrations of working with broader stakeholders in areas that touch all of our daily lives. So, these are new for Monsanto. I think they're new for our industry, and I suspect that if you go beyond agriculture, they're new experiments and how companies and other agencies touch each other. No group on its own has the solution to these problems, and that's the seeds of change. So, it's tough to do. The learnings on this, a single vision, a point of clarity makes a difference. If you know roughly where you're going, there's at least a 50-50 chance of getting there. Partnerships is a rich middle ground. It's a rich middle ground. It's open space, it's an opportunity, and it's really, really scary because you don't control much. But I think it is an opportunity. In closing, how do these lessons apply to St. Louis, which I think was part of the task in the Seeds of Change piece? How do they apply in our home community here? I think for me, if you think about the genesis of this place, it was a vision that Bill Danforth and a small handful penciled out a long time ago. And that vision was that this would become, this town, this region, would become a renowned hub for plant science and biotechnology. We're a long way towards achieving that goal, but it was the definition of where we were going to. The nice thing about St. Louis is we already are collaborative. It's kind of part of our DNA. It's kind of how we are. So the collaborative nature is pre-wired, and you can see that with the attendees in this room this morning. And the institutions are here. Many of the institutions are resident here today. We've got examples in St. Louis of some really great starts. Some of them very new, but great starts. The iCare at WashU. And iCare is, we love acronyms, iCare is the International Center for Advanced Renewable Energy. A very diverse group of companies and institutions coming together to focus on renewable energy. Across the street, as you drove in, the new bridge building here is an incubator for science and ultimately startups. And last week, we cut the tape at our research center here in Chesterfield, just out west of here. I would expect that we'll have 1,200 scientists living and working there in the next couple of years. They'll beat a path to St. Louis and they'll declare St. Louis home. But from home here, those scientists and the institutions that I've talked about touch the world. Just like that soybean that gets on a ship and goes far from here. They touch the world from our homes here. They have the potential of changing people's lives and satisfying the challenge of hunger from here in St. Louis. As they do that, they'll build businesses. Many of them will leave the incubators and the startups, and they'll build brand new businesses that we haven't even dreamt of today, and they'll raise families here in St. Louis. So in their personal way, I hope, they'll embrace this concept of seeds of change, and their contribution and their new partnerships with others in this region and from this region to other parts of the world will change people in all walks of life, from hungry Africans to people having their first hamburger in Beijing. That makes this region stronger, but I think as it makes this region stronger, it puts it on the map and addresses the early vision and the clarity that was brought in making this a hub for innovative science and the development of new products for the world. So I'd like to thank the team for the invitation to be your first Seeds of Change speaker. I'm sure the first of many. And I would encourage you as leaders in the community and as business leaders in this community to think about partnerships, particularly unconventional ones, and exercise the leadership that you have within this town to make a mark, not just in St. Louis and the broader region, but in the rest of the world. So thank you very much for the opportunity to address you this morning, and I'm really looking forward to your questions. Thank you.
All right, Hugh.
All right, Jim.
Jim, can you share with us the next emerging technology that will further solidify your organization, as well as St. Louis as one of the leaders in plant science technology?
I think one of the next ones for us, so extreme near term is we launched 2 new products this year. One in soybeans, that's the 11% more yield, and one in corn that's got better bug and weed control. And then 2013, as I mentioned in my remarks, it's drought tolerance. So the ability to grow more crops in drier conditions. Those are game-changing events.
Good.
I hope.
Here's one right on the target. What are the 3 most important things Monsanto must get right in the next 3 years?
We need to sell more seed. So we're going through a transitional period, and the reason that I missed our last date was we announced that we had changed completely our Roundup strategy, and I think in the last 2 weeks as a result of that, we've essentially exited the chemical space. So for us, what we need to get right, we've 2 products that we've launched this year. Those launches need to be executed flawlessly. And they're product launches, but they're platform launches. So a brand new platform for soybeans and a brand new platform for corn. And we will load our next generation of products on those platforms. So they're even bigger than product launches, and we need to get that right. So,
speaking to that, I'm in the investment business, and
I know that.
there are a lot of scared investors that are, concerned about putting more money in the market because of the volatility. I just heard this example given to me, and I said, what's the deal with these new seeds?
Yeah.
He said, they're kind of like investors. These farmers are concerned about the fluctuation in prices, and so they're not planning, 30% of their field with the new latest and greatest. Maybe they're trying it out on 5%. Is it really just a show-me type situation, or can you talk to that issue?
Yeah, it's entirely a show-me issues. So two brand new technologies, the opportunity for significantly greater yields, and growers this year will put their toe in the water. And I kind of hoped they'd put their foot in the water, but they put their toe in the water. So as we're living in 2011 now, so the seed that we planted 2 weeks ago is the seed we'll harvest this summer. We'll dry, clean and bag that seed, and we'll start selling it at Thanksgiving for spring 11 planting. So it's a long way of saying we've placed our bets on what we think 2011 will be. And to your previous question, we're now getting organized. We're in serious rehearsal for the spring of 11. And we're in a business it's kind of like Hallmark cards. You know, we're making a year ahead all the time. So we need to get our pricing right. We need to encourage trial. And for growers, that they work entirely on a risk mitigation model. So it's a lot less about winning big. It's a lot more about don't screw up. Because if you screw up, the bank takes the farm.
Right.
So our job is to drive efficiency and help them narrow that risk curve. And so you get a lot of investors saying, how will I know? When will I know that you're back on track? And the empirical answer to that is you'll know the day that the farmer runs a combine through the field. The harsh reality, Jim, is that'll be too late for you.
Right.
So we're in a bit of hiatus at the moment where they're testing whether these crops deliver what we say they will.
Right.
It's a long answer, but
No,
it's the
good
elephant
answer.
in the
Thank
room.
you. There's a lot of energy going into the discussion of focusing on the most efficient forms of biofuels.
Yeah.
Algae is playing a big role right here. Can you speak to our nation's focus on corn-based ethanol and its various non-economic motivations, and where that is taking Monsanto's energy-based portfolio?
It's a huge subject. So let me start here. The ethanol thing's hyper emotional. You know, you feed a London taxi cab and you starve a hungry African. You know, that's the polarization. And then within that, how dare you use food for fuel? It's an abomination. Yeah, and you've heard that, and it sells newspapers. Very sexy. The reality is, corn, when fractionated, can feed animals, people, and produce fuel. And the streams that emanate from that can do those three things admirably well. The 5 biggest corn harvests that America's ever seen in her history are the last 5 years. It's quite amazing. So it's like 5 World Cup victories back to back. So 5 biggest harvests in America in corn in the last 5 years. So in my book, in the near term, and it's the next 5 to 10 years, and I would bet 10 more than 5, bioethanol and plant-based biofuel from sugars and oils are going to be the predominant energy source in the space. When you get beyond the 10-year mark, biofuels from cellulose, from the waste material, probably start to emerge, but it's a decade away, and algae is probably beyond that. So I don't think there's any shortcuts in this. And then if you rewind it all and you say, ethanol from sugarcane in Brazil, the landed cost of that ethanol from Brazil into New Jersey is high.
Okay.
Number one. Number two, it looks to me as if there's going to be a big rethink on domestic drilling and domestic oil exploration, which puts an even greater pressure on domestically produced bioethanol. That's the second piece. And then the third piece is the cavalry isn't coming anytime soon on cellulosic ethanol. And I think that defines the midterm space on a ethanol-based substitution opportunity.
So we're just not there yet.
Well, I think there's tons of headroom in ethanol, and there's a lot of improvements can be made. If you buy a Ford in Brazil, 70-something% of the new rolling stock in Brazil today is all flex fuel. And there's a chip in that fuel tank that doesn't care what goes in the tank. It adjusts electronically the carburation. but 77% of that new stock is all adapted for bioethanol. We need to do more of that here.
Gotcha.
Very biased opinion, but
Here's a fastball down the middle. What are Monsanto's thoughts and plans for healthier food crops?
yeah, for us, the healthy crops for us, we've two avenues. One are low to zero sat oils for soybeans. So, you know, when you go to the supermarket and you buy margarine and things, and it talks about hydrogenation. So they hydrogenate oil to stop it going rancid on the shelf. So you can store it in regular temperatures. But when you hydrogenate oil, you change the saturation, which is bad for your heart. So we're now in our first generation, our second generation soybeans, I think 2013, 2014, which will have zero trans fats. So you'll have a processing fraction in a soybean oil that looks a lot like olive oil. So that would be a big play for us. And we'll load that on this new platform.
Okay.
So those will replenish on the existing platform. And then in the same time frame, we'll launch our first plant-based omega-3s. So how many of you take fish oil capsules? You know those big monster horse pills? Yeah, 4 people. Yeah, right. Yeah. So after exercise, and then 80 milligrams of aspirin a day, the next best thing you can take for the 4 of you are fish oil capsules, and they're big and they're horrible, and they taste like fish, which is why nobody admits to take
I was
them.
told actually that the omega-3 actually comes from the algae that the
And
fish
that's
eat.
right. You're dead right. So
Okay.
the fish don't make the omega-3s, they eat the algae, and the algae, these little plant, marine-based plant, they produce the omega-3s, and then they're bioaccumulated in the fish. Deep cold water fish. So we took the genes out of the algae and put them in soybeans, and on the crush now, about 25 to 30% of the soy oil is expressed as an omega-3, and it doesn't taste the fish. So you can put it in yogurt or in health bars or in breakfast cereal, and then more than 4 of you will admit to taking omega-3s. So, and it's good news for the fish as well. That's the other.
All right. What would be the single largest challenge in getting desperate stakeholder groups to understand the benefits of plant sciences?
I think this is ongoing. I don't think it'll ever. I don't think there's an epiphanic moment where one day we wake up and say, now everybody thinks this is a really cool idea. But what I've seen in the last 4 years or 5 years, what I've seen is a convergence to the middle. And usually in areas of high anxiety, the outer edges don't change, but it's the convergence that counts. And the convergence in this from various stakeholders around biotechnology, in my mind, the convergence occurred with the food shortages that occurred around the world. So commodity prices went through the roof. Food got expensive, but in some parts of the world, food ran out. And that was a wake-up call. And I think a lot of countries went back and re-examined their agricultural policy. Because usually you go through an agricultural policy revision before you build bridges and railroads and airports and factories. And a lot of people doubled back, I think, and took a hard look at ag policy and asked the question, if America's yielding 160, how come we're yielding 50? And Brazil, India, and Mexico are not third world, have sophisticated agriculture and have the capacity to do a whole lot more. And that shifted the stakeholder discussion because the conversation says, I'm still worried about these technologies, but I realize we'll have to do something different. And it actually started a dialogue and a middle ground debate that I hadn't seen in the previous 10 years. And it got dwarfed, You had a financial meltdown that chased the food shortage off the front page. But that food shortage is still there. It didn't magically, it's just the media struggles with tackling 2 or 3 major things all at once. So the financial crisis dwarfed the food crisis, but it's still bouncing along. So I think that engendered a lot of work that ordinarily hadn't been touched.
And that may kind of, unfortunately, we need kind of something to happen in order to get us to kind of take a step forward in looking at this a little more aggressively. Is that?
Yeah, that's usually the case in most things, yeah.
Right. What is the long-term goal of average bushels per acre for corn, and what is the risk of disease wiping out genetically similar corn and soybeans?
Yeah, I think, as I mentioned in my remarks, I think we have the capacity of doubling. My concern in doubling, a lot of people say if you double, you're going to implode the world's commodity markets, and we'll be swimming in soybeans. And I actually worry more. I worry more about the other end of the equation, that doubling. I don't think doubling's enough, in my humble opinion. Not because of population growth, because of dietary shifts. Disease is a watcher. We're seeing some of that. Forget biotech. We're seeing some of that today with population density. So a lot of these crops now are being bred so that you can grow more stalks on the same acre. So it's a bit like riding the subway in London or New York. You get used to kind of. So we're breeding crops that are more comfortable in tighter populations, and you have to manage disease as you do them.
There's a great deal of talk about our region becoming the center for ag tech.
Yeah.
The Danforth Center, Bridge Park, the new Monsanto, Chesterfield Village Research Center. They're three of the most recent developments to give further critical mass to the region's strong asset base in plant science.
Yep.
Do you believe that we can indeed become the world-leading center for ag, and what do we need to kind of take the next step?
Yeah, I do. I just, this is such an interesting question. It's so St. Louis, it's, it's how do we know we're there? How do do you really think this is possible? I think there's a piece that is just get over it. We absolutely do have the ability to do that, and I think we're well down that path. A piece of this is that the party's here for a lot of these sciences. So the selling point, when we bring people in, the selling point is, and I've talked about this often, you need to get the family here. Because if I live in the Bay Area or I live in Boston, St. Louis is a scary place. It's far away, it's really warm, and it's a long trip to the seaside. You get families here, particularly with young kids, for a weekend, and it's done. It's done. So there's a piece of this isn't how do you make this the hub and the center. The science is here, the technology is here, the institutions are here. We need to sell the city, and there's a piece of this is, it's a little bit an inferiority complex. Will we ever be able to compete? And I just say that's so yesterday. My kids say that's so yesterday, Dad. I think we need to get past that and get to the next piece.
Right.
So if you said hardcore, what else is needed is funding. It's continued injection of cash. If you're going to compete on a global level, you have to fund at a global level, and that's true for here. It's evidenced across the street at the Bridge Park. There's none of this comes for nothing, and it's a sprint. Everything in this area is marathons, and it's consecutive marathons, and the strongest win. So I just get past the St. Louis piece. This is a great place. It's a good place to work. It's a good place to bring up kids. Done. This is much more about long-term funding and cracking the code on how we attract investment.
All right. Maybe we can go to the microphones now, just for one more question before Dr. Danforth makes some remarks.
Sure.
Anyone?
And I've got 3 questions I'm going to ask. It's unconventional. I never told you that, but
no.
Yeah.
Fire.
It's the power of having a microphone. There's a question in the middle here.
You alluded to, or actually said specifically, that you think part of the future is based on unconventional partnerships or relationships.
Yep.
Could you give us a few examples of what you would consider to be unconventional in a relationship?
Yeah. So it's a great question, and it's a challenging one because it's it's describe the unforeseen event, or describe the partnerships that you never thought were possible, and that's always hard to do. But so let me give you a couple of pointers. Dialogue we've been having with the World Wildlife Fund, the panda. And that's where a lot of the conversation on habitat preservation. So one of their biggest threats is agriculture. And it's agriculture relative to water purity, sediment and outflow, and it's agriculture versus habitat destruction. It's a really interesting dialogue working with a group like that and talking about the impact, the derivative of yield versus habitat preservation. So that's an unlikely space. Another one is organic food and organic seed production. And the conversation goes something along the lines of, your biotech really scares me, but I'm really, really interested in your breeding technologies. So we spend $1 billion a year on R&D. Half of that goes in biotech, which is where all the controversy and headlines and sex appeal is. And the other $500 million goes on breeding, and it's never talked about. But improving the efficiency of breeding, we get this whole technology called marker-assisted breeding, which is really the road signs. It's MapQuest for corn. And once you have the street signs, then you can get to a destination a lot faster and with a higher degree of certainty. The organic seed producers are really interested in that whole area. And then the last one, I think, and this one's a stretch, but I think it's panning out. The US led the world on aid and development funding for many, many years, from the Kennedy era for a long time. And the American brand in third world agriculture was second to none. They led the world on helping small farmers, and then it all went away. And at the moment you see a resurgence in that third world investment, and the linkage of technology providers, non-profits, NGOs like the Danforth Center, working with government on how you address that is a whole new field. And the incursion of Gates and some of these big philanthropic houses to set deadlines, milestones, outcomes, that's a new language versus, hey, I'm doing good. I'm doing God's work. You can't argue with me, versus what you're going to do next Thursday. I like that, but that's a whole new dialogue. So, 3. I get 3 questions.
Shoot.
Here's 3 questions, and points mean prizes, okay? So the traditional view, you sit there, I talk, you leave. So this is the piece where, so I'm going to ask 3 questions. The last one is the Grand Slam prize. And you're going to have to, we'll capture names, all right? So the 3 winners, if you kind of hang back at the end, we'll get names, because Rolexes and condos in Florida, so. So here's the first one, and these are USDA peer-validated numbers. Here's a good one. 1 acre of corn removes how many tons of CO2 in a year? Greenhouse gases, CO2, carbon sequestration. 1 acre of corn, I give you a clue with the tons. How many tons? Just guess. There's no harm in, we'll get nearest to the post. Jim's the final decider. How many tons of CO2? How many? Come on, St. Louis, come on. Who said that?
60 and 200.
60, 200. You got another number that's slightly smaller than those 2? Who said 6? There you go. There's the winning one. The answer's 8. So there's 8 tons of CO2. So here's the next one. So CO2, bad thing, sequestrate. Oxygen, good thing, you breathe, right? So winner up there. Here's the next one. 180 bushels, so just a little bit more than average, but if you were farming around here, 180 bushels of corn. 1 acre, 180 bushels of corn. How much oxygen does that release in a year? And we'll make it easy so you don't have to. How many people could breathe for a year in the oxygen from an acre of corn? Many people. Come on, Phil, don't be shy. 20? Bigger number than that. Who said 100? 100. So, winner up here with 8 tons, 131 people. So just think, you drive by an acre of corn, there's 131 people breathing easier as a result of that. Here's the star prize, okay? So this is the third and final one in the Seeds for Change inaugural Donald Danforth Plant Science Center speech. Who's wearing blue jeans in here this morning? That's what I would have guessed with this crowd.
Oh, there's one up there.
You're wearing blue jeans?
2.
There you go, so 2. So for the 2 people here wearing blue jeans, how many gallons of water does it take to grow? Not to do the washing, engineer the holes, do all the bleaching. How much water does it take to grow the cotton for their blue jeans? I'll give you a clue. That's a big number. So it's hundreds of gallons. Who said 700? Oh, right, 700 gallons. Well done. Well done. So we'll get the 3. 700 gallons of water to produce the cotton for a pair of blue jeans, which is one pair. So we get 1,400 gallons of water between the 2 guys at the back. So 3 winners, 3 prizes. Who was the 700 gallon?
Talk to Laura.
700 gallons. So the two winners will donate the corn and the fertilizer to grow a ton of grain in a project we're working in Malawi, and will reflect your name. And for the 700 gallon winner, where was the 700 gallon? We will donate a cow and calf, in a project we're working in Kenya. So they go to widows in villages. She starts a dairy business by selling the milk, because pregnant cows make milk, right? And when the calf is born, they then select somebody else in the village who starts again with that new calf. So you'll have the naming rights in that calf if you grab me at the end. So thanks very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
Thanks a lot. Bill?
Well, that was wonderful. Thanks, Jim, for being a great MC and handling the questions well. And thanks to all of you for coming out in the rain. And I am particularly pleased that this leadership group that is sponsoring the Seeds for Change shares a passion with me, and that's how do we build and support great things in St. Louis. And so I'm very, very pleased. And I think if there had been no rain, we'd probably have standing room only. I also want to thank Hugh very much. Monday, I went out to the new Monsanto Chesterfield Research Center, and it was rededicated. The first dedication for Monsanto was in 1983. And then with all of the changes that went on in Monsanto, it ended up in Pfizer's hands, Monsanto renting just one building there for the plant science work. And now with the downsizing of Pfizer, a real St. Louis company, Monsanto is taking it back over. And I think that I told Hugh that's only justice. Great thing for St. Louis, and to have a St. Louis company, a real St. Louis company, taking over those land and buildings. I went through one of the buildings, and I just wanted to report, since Hugh didn't, the quality and the speed of the research is just amazing. There's a great deal of automation, so that instead of doing experiments on 10 things, you can do experiments on thousands of things very quickly, all automated, and then have the computer power to analyze the data. And that speeds up research. I don't know how many times. I don't have a figure, so I can't give a prize, but it was wonderful. It was really wonderful to see. And if you think back, the modern plant science really started with Monsanto. You know, most things start in research laboratories that are not-for-profit, like universities and whatnot. But the modern plant science really started with Monsanto, with several people leading the way, including one who's here, Ernie Jaworski. And we wouldn't have all this great possibility today to save the environment, to feed people better, if some of those early changes hadn't happened in Monsanto. So I've always thought that for-profit companies really bring wonderful things to our society. I've always thought that and admired it. The for-profit companies that produce things that do wonderful things for humanity. And I'm just thrilled to see that Monsanto, how it's grown and developed new strength under its very able leader, Hugh Grant. So Hugh, thank you very much for being with us.
May I add a comment about you and Monsanto, especially for an audience that's richly involved in business and financial?
Can you hear, Phil? No. Oh. All right.
You ought to really understand the difference about Monsanto and Hugh Grant, who I may or probably know 15 or 20 years. There was truly they got it on the business side about the technology. I've been in a lot of companies, and for a while, technology is the engine. They always embrace the potential that the seed is an information system, and you could stack science on that with a vision. And for many years, it took great courage. And you know, there was a time, and Ernie and I know this, and when people were saying, how do you make money out of seed businesses? And they never took their eye off the ball. And you and Henrik and others, who we've watched many times, it is one of the great examples. I think the only other example I know of that was Roy Vagelos in Merck, which was the brief moment in the sun of the pharmaceutical industry. It's really rare, and to be able to have a predictable commitment to technology and technology understanding what you need in the business. And there's a very special environment, and you should understand how unique a company Monsanto is in you. And as a witness on the side, I wanted to share that with you.
Thank you all for coming.